Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're basically becoming forensic investigators, but for coral reefs. We're going to learn how to read the secret stories that are written right into their skeletons. So yeah, let's just dive right in.
I mean, it's a huge challenge, right? When you're looking at a reef, you're seeing a massive, bustling city built by over 1,000 different species. Figuring out who's who isn't just for fun. It's absolutely essential for science. So where do you even start?
Well, first things first, you have to ignore the most obvious thing you see, their color. As beautiful as they are, coral colors are totally unreliable. They can change depending on the light, the water depth, even the coral's health. The real, unchanging truth? That's locked away in the hard calcium carbonate skeleton. That's our blueprint.
Okay, so let's start with level 1, the colony shape. The first step is to just zoom out and look at the big picture, the overall shape of the entire coral colony. This is what we call its growth form. It's kind of like telling a pine tree from an oak tree just by its silhouette. Same idea.
First up, the one everybody thinks of, branching corals. These are the ones that create those incredible underwater forests. You know, things like staghorn coral, reaching up and out, all competing for that precious sunlight. This is the shape that builds that amazing 3D habitat where so many fish and critters make their home.
Now, not all corals branch out. Some have a different strategy for growing upwards. They shoot straight up from the ocean floor in these thick pillars or columns. These are the columnar corals, and they can look just like a little city of skyscrapers rising from the reef. And then you have the total opposite. Some corals don't reach for the sky at all. They play a completely different game. Encrusting corals are the ultimate survivors. They grow in a thin, tough layer right over the surface of the rock, almost like a living coat of paint. This low profile makes them incredibly resistant to big waves and storms. From those low-profile survivors, we move to the absolute heavyweights of the reef, massive corals. Think of those huge, boulder-like species, like the famous brain corals. These are the ancient foundations of the reef, growing super slowly, sometimes for hundreds of years. So if massive corals are all about building for strength, plating corals are all about building for sunlight. These guys are the solar panels specialists. They grow out in these wide, flat, horizontal shelves, which is a brilliant way to maximize the surface area they can expose to the sun, especially in deeper, darker water. Now this next one, folios, might look a little like plating at first glance, but it is way more delicate. Folios corals grow in these really beautiful, thin, swirling patterns that look just like flower petals or the leaves on a head of lettuce. They're some of the most intricate and fragile things you'll see down there.
So far, every coral we've looked at is basically cemented to the reef. But, there's always an exception to the rule. Meet the free-living corals. These are the nomads of the reef. They're usually single individuals, like mushroom corals, and they just live unattached on the sand. And for our last shape, let's get a little architectural. This is the facilloid form. Okay, the name sounds a bit technical, but the idea is simple. Imagine a bundle of straws. Each individual polyp builds its own little tube, and they all rise up together from a common base. It's a really cool way to build a colony. Okay, so that's level 1, the overall shape. Now for level 2, we're going to grab our magnifying glass and zoom way, way in, down to the fundamental building block of the entire skeleton. It's a structure called the correlate.
So what exactly is a correlate? Well, every single one of those little animals in the colony, called a polyp, builds its own tiny limestone cup to live in. That cup is the correlate. Think of it as the polyp's own personal apartment. The entire skeleton is just thousands, sometimes millions, of these tiny homes all fused together.
And now we go even deeper. Welcome to level 3, the anatomy of the corallite. The size, the shape, and all the little structures inside these tiny cups, that's where the most important clues are. This is where the real detective work happens. If you could peer down into one of these little cups, you'd see a series of thin, vertical blades that radiate out from the center. They kind of look like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. These are the septa, and they provide structural support inside the polyp's home. Okay, now look at the outside of that very same corallite cup. You'll see similar-looking vertical ridges running down the exterior. Those are the costae. They're really just the septa that have kept growing up and over the wall to the outside. So here's the dead simple rule to remember. Are the blades inside the cup? They're septa. Are they on the outside of the cup? They're costae. Inside versus outside.
That's really the only distinction you need to know.
And what's the dividing line between the inside and the outside? Well, it's the wall. The wall is the raised rim of that little cup that separates one polyp's home from its neighbors. It's the barrier between the septa and the costae. But here's where it gets really cool. Not all walls are the same, and how they're arranged is another huge clue. Sometimes each corallate has its own distinct private wall. Other times, neighboring polyps share a wall between them, kind of like a townhouse. And in some corals, the walls are all fused together or seem to disappear entirely, creating that awesome maze-like pattern you see in brain corals.
All right, we've got the basics down. So let's take everything we just learned and apply it to a really special case, branching corals. These guys are unique because they often have two totally different types of corallites on the very same colony. So if you look at the very tip of a growing branch, you'll often see one single important-looking corallite right at the end. That is the axial corallite. It's the leader driving the growth of the branch forward. All the other, usually smaller corallites that pop out along the sides, those are the radial corallites. And whether a coral has an axial corallite or not is a major identification feature. Okay, phew! We've gone from the whole colony all the way down to the tiniest details inside a single polyp's home. You might be wondering, why on earth does this level of detail matter so much? So let's zoom back out and talk about the big picture. Being able to read a skeleton like this is absolutely fundamental. For starters, it's how scientists can actually classify and put a name to all those thousands of species. And that's critical because research isn't valid if you don't know exactly what species you're studying. It's also crucial for monitoring reef health. Ecologists can see if certain species are taking over or if others are disappearing. And of course, all of that information feeds directly into conservation. You simply can't protect a species if you can't identify it in the first place.
You know, when you really think about it, every tiny groove on a coral skeleton is a page in a history book. It's a record of life, of evolution, and of its environment. And as our oceans are changing so rapidly, learning how to read these intricate stories is more urgent than ever. It really makes you wonder, what other secrets about survival and the future of our reefs are just waiting to be decoded?